Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Lowdown. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the sporting director of Bolton Wanderers, Chris Markham. Chris, a big warm welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Connor. Thanks for having me on. Hope you're well.
Very good indeed. Chris, I know you've listened to a few episodes by now. Could you please take us through your earliest football memory?
Oof. Earliest football memory, I suppose, would be watching 4-year-old with my dad, Huddersfield Town, the old Leeds Road ground, the local rivalry. It was against Bradford. Huddersfield won 1-0. Just, yeah, don't remember that much about it other than that was my first game, the score. And yeah, it was an old school football ground, an old school football experience, and probably been hooked ever since then, really.
Yeah, and I suppose that's funny enough to begin with an old school ground because indeed, like where you are now, Bolton, like kind of what's lampooned at you guys is that you're a club with modern day methods and old school values. And before we touch upon the present day, of course, we're going to have to speak about your illustrious past, both at Huddersfield Town indeed and the FA. But it was in fact at your boyhood club, Huddersfield, that you got the big break in particular. And you spent an awful lot of time on the grass there, and it coincided with a pretty successful period at the club.
Yeah, it was. When I look back, it was something that we managed to pretty much every season for I think it was 8 seasons I was there. We improved on the league finish season after season, and my first experience of being there, sort of going in fresh face at 22, being a fan of the club, was a big learning experience. Obviously, lucky enough to be working with a really forward-thinking group of staff and coaches at that time when Lee Clark was manager, and the place where I met my mentor Steve Black, who obviously Steve sadly no longer with us, but obviously I know was a huge impact on a lot of people across a variety of sports and left a lasting impact on my life. But I suppose my career as well. On top of that, I was studying psychology, got a master's in sports psychology at the time, and somehow ended up in analysis sort of by default. Really, there was at the time the club were paying for Pro Zone 3, which was the only club in League One at that time to be doing so. But it was at the age where we didn't really they had the data in the contract. But they didn't really have an analyst or anyone to use a laptop. So coming in and out of uni, I could use a laptop. I had a decent understanding of football and thought, well, I don't know, I can learn. And yeah, I did a lot of listening in that time, speaking to Blackie a lot, and developing like start. You begin obviously all the time, don't you? Thinking about how I would do things or how what I could learn and take from the methods that were going on at the time, and that was something that I really owe to Blackie, starting to be curious. I suppose that was the first thing, and it was always about being respectful, but being curious. And yeah, that that was a huge part. I think the culture that Blackie put in place at the club. Again, we were well backed by Dean Hoyle, obviously a local businessman and fan who funded the club. And it was the start, really, of the new revolution for the club. And like I said, it was a really exciting time to be part of it. We improved season upon season. I became the club's first head of analysis and sort of grew the department, including the academy. And like I said, I was in a bit of a different position at the club. Were a bit forward thinking at the time. They were the only team in that league to invest in Prozone, and gave me my first taste of using football data, but not just having it, actually applying it and thinking about how this could make an impact. So over the years I was there was obviously a lot of change. There were probably times where I thought, when people around me would say, "You've been there like 5, 6 seasons now. Is it not time to move on? Is it not time to try something else?" But when you look at it in football, the strange thing is you probably don't have to move on far to experience lots of different things, sadly. In most clubs. But in the time I was there, I had 5, 6 managers, including caretakers, loads of different staff. And I think that plus my journey, getting involved in the game at the age that I did and at the time in the game that I did gave me an advantage. I don't think I would get the opportunities now to be involved in the game. The amount of talented young analysts there are out these days, and sports scientists and coaches and a whole host of professionals. I think I would probably struggle to get that in. So I was lucky at that time to be able to to get the in, but to get the in a first team environment, I think was massive, and I think that's something that really has accelerated my development. When I look back, being in first team dressing rooms from my very first day, where winning matters, and obviously the youth development aspect of football is a hugely important one as well. But that when that pressure's there, it is a very, very different environment, and obviously you're learning a lot about people, about how they react under pressure. And I think that was the thing at Huddersfield at my time, that learning off 5, 6 different managers, so many different players, different characters, managing upwards at times, dealing with the tricky part of it, forming relationships with co-workers and disagreements, and all that's amplified when the pressure of winning is on there. So yeah, the first season we lost in the playoff semi-final to Millwall. Second season we lost in the final to Peterborough, and then the following season we continued that into a football league winning our league football league record at 43-game unbeaten run. We then won the playoff final that following season, and then from there we managed to sort of stay up the first season and the last day of the season, the championship, and progress. And then I left halfway through David Wagner's promotion season. So yeah, it was a bit of a bad time to leave being a Huddersfield fan. Didn't actually get to see the promotion, but it was a successful period for the club for sure.
What an incredible apprenticeship that is, nonetheless, working for a boyhood club. And may I say, like the criteria for taking a performance analyst job probably is a bit more extensive than having laptop skills now. But you know, Chris, you speak about spending a lot of time listening, an awful lot of time learning.
Mhm.
You know, as you know, for us all, that could be quite uncomfortable time having blind spots highlighted to us. And of course, you were quite the mentor there in Blackie. What was
Mhm.
the biggest lesson you learned about yourself during that initial period at Huddersfield?
I think it was that. I think it wasn't really about myself. I was learning about the game at that point. I learned a lot of things about, like I said, relationships and how to build. But I think it was just listening to the game and understanding how it works, how people in the industry work. When I got there, it was first day I was there, obviously Blackie's experience across, despite never having played, being a professional boxer, but despite never having played, there was Lee Clark, X100 Premier League games, Terry McDermott, 3 Champions Leagues, however many leagues, so many top flight games in England international. Derek Fazackerley, 700 games for Blackburn and England assistant manager. Steve Watson, X100 Premier League games. Paul Stevenson played with Gaza, played at a really high level. For me, it was about listening and taking things on board, and I think that's something that was a good lesson to learn from Blackie. Was sometimes, particularly when you're coming into that environment as a young practitioner and as someone who's inexperienced, the ones who I've seen and come across who fail are the ones who probably don't listen enough and think that they have to talk in order to impress. Whereas I think you've got much better chance of impressing if you listen, and then you're able to make sense of what's going on around you, have the self-awareness and regulation to be able to know when to make I was always encouraged to have an input, and I was always actively told to have an input, but it's about not pushing that too far at times, maybe not being too eccentric with your views, and building relationships, building trust. And then look, as that trust got built, I became more and more influential and was able to help Lee Clark in his preparation and the squad more and more. I think it was that was probably the biggest learning, is knowing when and when not to talk. I was speaking to someone the other day and they had a good phrase of know when to be wallpaper. And I actually think as an up and coming practitioner in the game, that'd be a big piece of advice that I would pass on, that I'd say I learn about myself.
And indeed, I mean, you picked quite an nadir, I would say, to leave Huddersfield Town. In fact, it was during that promotion season under David Wagner, but it was a special time too for yourself and countless others. I mean, you headed up the games insight department at the FA, specialising in special projects and opposition analysis. A period which I'm sure, if you're not already, like people in the years to come will be reflected upon fondly as I would say, one of the golden eras or recent golden eras, perhaps in English football.
Yeah, absolutely. When I look back, it doesn't, some of the stuff that happened probably doesn't still seem real in terms of how successful we were able to be in that time. Obviously, I left it, like I said, I left Huddersfield January 2017, and That just coincided with all the good work that had been already begun at the FA by obviously Dan Ashworth at the top, Dave Redding, who I know you've had on, and their ideas from the top and setting that strategy. There's the specialist coaching model. They appointed Reese Long, who's someone who's been very influential on my career as the head of analysis there. And they had, there was a real, you could sense when I went there and managed to get the position that this was going to be an exciting time. Probably didn't expect that golden summer of 2017 to be as good as it was. All the youth tournaments, I was fortunate enough to work on every single one of them in terms of supporting the opposition analysis, working with all the coaches to provide detail, obviously, on the next opponents. It's totally different opposition analysis in a tournament setting compared to obviously a league where the fixtures 9 months in advance. For the later games of the season, you're having to react to the draw. There was the draws when the third place can go through. Like, it was a nightmare, logistically a nightmare. So learned a lot about the importance of planning and making sure that what would happen in the past is teams would actually get less detail the further they got into the tournament. So the bigger games, they had the least amount of detail. So the way in which, as the analysis and coaching department, we were able to devise that gave us a real advantage to be able to basically get our coaches on the grass a day earlier than everybody else. And that's something that first year, obviously there was the under-17s, lost the Euros final, heartbreaking way, last kick of the game. Then obviously the under-20s did brilliantly well, won the World Cup. The 19s, they won the Euros, and then that 17s group again, the 21s semi-finals, and then in that latter part of the year, the famous group of your Sancho, Foden group won the World Cup again. So it was an unprecedented year in age group football. So yeah, that was a really exciting time for that first year. Just from that point of view, and then obviously going into the Russia World Cup was where things got even
Because
more exciting, I suppose.
you spoke in the previous podcast before about, if Huddersfield was a masters on the grass, certainly your time at the FA was a masters in strategy, beyond the pitch. And it just
Yeah,
seemed to me to be like
yeah.
a perfect, like if you reflect upon the people as you alluded to there earlier on that spent that time at the FA, it just seemed to be the University of Football at the time.
Oh yeah, it was unbelievable, and that's the biggest thing. Like, it was a really tough decision. Like, my personal life, it did really. It was a real grind having to leave Huddersfield at that point. I got along well with David. Obviously, Stuart Webber was at Huddersfield as well, and there was a lot of really good things going on there as well. So it was a really tough decision to leave. But ultimately, it came down to expanding the network, and I'd say it was the best decision I made. Looking at some of the people who were there, Premier League managers now, two Premier League managers as of today, other people who've managed at high levels, coaching at high levels. Dan obviously has gone on to do great things. And it really was, like you say, it was a lot of really good work and really good practitioners and really good ideas going on at that time. And there was a real feel good factor around the whole organisation at that time. And I think, like you say, that attracted people. St George's Park, obviously, as well, being central location. I think that's an underrated thing, an underrated idea to move that from Wembley. We had a lot of people from all over the country, so you were able to get the best staff rather than just ones that would relocate to Wembley. So there were, none of it was so well planned, and there was so much detail go into that it wasn't luck. You felt the momentum building, which is obviously something always special to be a part of.
100%. And I mean, if Huddersfield didn't already, your time at the FA certainly laid the foundations for the present day at Bolton. That I would describe from the outside, it seems to be a club now flourishing, and it's some turn of events in the past few years. When you look at the last month, winning 7-0 at home in front of nearly 25,000 people, you're right in contention there to get promoted this season to the Championship. However, that's really in contrast to the start. when you're going in, it wasn't quite the perfect
Yeah,
circumstance near the bottom of League Two, just out of administration. The training ground had just
yeah,
been sold. I mean,
yeah,
the situation is as ground zero as that. I mean, that seems to
yeah.
fit the definition of it. Where do you even begin, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was in a sense a little luckier than Ian. Obviously, you never he was there 6 months before me, and I think him and the owner Sharon, I think they were probably at true ground zero. Um, we always talk about this. You know, it was a way really like there were people around me who were sort of questioning what are you doing. There was the World Cup coming up. There'd been a successful period. Obviously, COVID had an impact on that. So there was a lot of change, obviously, at the FA during that time. But it was an opportunity to be able to go and, like you say, the ground zero, the blank sheet nature. What we talked about this actually just last night, and it was that can be daunting. But I sort of looked at it in a different way, as there was no change management needed, and I'd spent, at that time, so 3 years ago this year, I'd spent 12, 13 years working under all these managers, with all these coaches, with all these practitioners. And it got to the point, obviously, the FA is such a big organisation. I was beginning now to really hone and develop my philosophy and my strategies and how I would do things, taking different bits from everybody. And it got to the point where that opportunity came along out of the blue, really, and I thought it's too good. It's too good to pass up. I've got an opportunity here with no change management required to shape this with someone who is like-minded as me, with Ian, and with a brilliant owner who wants to set a culture and a tone for the club. So it could have been like, when I look back, a lot of other people around me were saying this is quite daunting. It's a risk. Whereas I suppose I never looked at it like that, having met the people and knowing what our vision was, and being obviously confident in myself, that it was a massive opportunity rather than something that was a risk. And I think, yeah, to start with, that role was really focused on recruitment after the good window that Ian had. But like I said, the first time I sat down to watch a game, we were 20th in League Two. I think the team hadn't won in 6, 7 games when I first met Ian, and we had a lot of really good, robust conversations. And what was meant to be a half an hour coffee turned into 4 hours, where we were constantly battling ideas back and forth. And I know I've spoken about this before, but how forward thinking and open minded he was to embrace what some of the ideas and modern ways that he was. Look, a young coach as well, with really good methods himself. It just seemed to fit perfectly. So it was when I look back at that time during COVID as well, like, it was a bit of a blur, and life wasn't normal still at that point. So it was being able to throw myself into it all day, every day, to try and build something that was different. And I think that was the key when we sat down with Sharon, the owner, was we want to do things differently. And obviously, appointing someone with my background was very different. I know they had a lot of experienced football people from recruitment and different areas who they could have looked at, but they wanted to do things differently. And I think that was something, obviously, that spoke to me in a really positive way as well. So yeah, it was a really sort of successful year. Ian and the staff did a great job getting with that season. Sort of, I was doing a lot of work with Ian in the background on building recruitment departments and performance departments, and helping getting in better information week to week. But yeah, went on an unprecedented run from 20th and won promotion on the last day of the season, finished third and get promoted. It was crazy, really.
Incredible. And speaking of differently, there, both Ian and yourself are on record of about the club being in the League of One. Could you explain more about
Mm.
that idea?
Yeah, that's what we wanted to. That's obviously come from conversations with the ownership and ourselves. Like, we want to do, yeah, basically coming back to wanting to do things differently. Whether that be, culturally, I know from the top, that's what Sharon's put a lot of her energy into, and really made a huge success of the culture and the reputation that the club has. Obviously, the way that we want to go about the playing style, and certainly the methodologies that we apply to performance and recruitment. I think it was about looking and trying to do things. How much bespoke information that's evidence based, ideally, can we get to Ian for him to make support him making the best decisions, and myself and him to come up with the right answers for the club. So yeah, that being in a league of one really came from that. How do we be different? How do we think different? Because it's a competitive industry, and there's a lot of to say how competitive it is. I do think there's a lot of safety. I think in football in general, there's a huge amount of self-preservation, huge amount of self-protection, and as we know, that doesn't breed imaginative thinking and evolution. It's not a precursor to that. So I think that's something that again, going back to when I first arrived there, hearing that, and then actually now over the 3 years, coming up to 3 years, being involved in that has been a hugely rewarding, and hopefully, yeah, I think so far we've, again, similar to Huddersfield, really sustainable success at the moment. We're improving season on season, and if we keep doing that, that's probably the utopia in football. Like, you see so many teams win something or do well, then straight back down, or sack another manager if they've just got promotion, or it's how can you have sustained success? I think that's the utopia that we're aiming for.
Yeah, and it's interesting here you speak about risk and safety. To the dogmatic follower, one could say a Bolton style of play is quite risky, be it at the level in League One. But I
Yep.
mean, it seems to me to be a club where there is no half measures, because obviously to have a philosophy as hardwired as that, it obviously fits in, drips down to the game model, drips down to the people that you bring into the building, drips into your
Yeah.
recruitment and playing DNA and
Yeah.
whatnot. How do
Mhm.
you encourage people around you, not so much in senior positions? Chris, I'm concerned about now. How do you encourage them to take risks, be less risk averse in their jobs?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that comes certainly in the performance team. I think to have that feeling that this is a long-term project. When I first sat down with Sharon, I always say this. I spoke to Ian about this as well. And when I sat down, I had a young daughter, and I had my second daughter. My wife was pregnant with my second daughter. So to leave the FA, that is notoriously a place where you can have a long career. It was a risk, and I remember sitting to Sharon and saying, "Can how secure is this? We've just not won in 6 games." Her words were, "Ian could lose the next 10 games, and he's getting sacked. He's got my backing, and this is a long-term project, and we'll go on this journey together." And I think that having that set out at the very top enables us to say, deal with that. So I think why people, like I said just now, why people don't take risks is for the fear of failure. Whereas if we're saying this is the strategy for the club, we're all going to take risks. Don't worry about the consequences of if it doesn't go wrong, because obviously that's part of risk. There's a chance it can go wrong. So I think it's trying to make sure that strategy that was set at the top that day permeates down, and yeah, it's around being comfortable to take risks, but also being curious and how can we do things differently, to make sure that we're better. Look, we don't have as big a budget as what people would think, because we want to do things in a sustainable, smart way, and we want to do things. We know where this club has been, and we want to make sure that the things that we're doing aren't too risky. So the amount of risk we take on the pitch is the highest risk that's taken at the club, whereas in the past that wasn't the case. So yeah, that's something that's obviously hugely important, and being bringing the fan base on board, that Ian, and particularly Sharon, obviously as the face of it, have done a really good job of.
Yeah, and I think that strategy has been pretty mapped out and vocalized as well, which the community have certainly kind of reciprocated back to you and vocalized their support. Chris, in terms of, you spoke about phase one previously, about doing anything you can to achieve promotion from League Two to League One. Phase two is more about the integration of data and providing hardcore and raw insights from the best information possible to Ian's
Yeah.
disposal. I'm just curious now, is phase three, does that coincide with your own promotion from that as technical performance director now to sporting director?
Potentially. Obviously, I think that the key thing to think about, and obviously want to talk about the role of the technical director, the sporting director. There's so many different titles for it, and I think it's so different every club. And I think there's a pressure for the industry in general to try and pigeonhole people and pigeonhole roles. Do they do this? Do they do that? Are they responsible for this? Are they responsible for that? And I think it's trying to get away from that. And that's what, Sharon tells the story when I first joined and I said, what's my job title? She said, I haven't got a clue. But I know that speaking to Ian, speaking to you, this is the right team that we're building. And let's just see how we evolve. So I think after 2 years in this summer, I've been there just over 2 years. It was the right time to actually look at what things I could be responsible for and take off Ian's plate even more and allow a bit more of a long-term focus. There were so many things, and there still are so many things that need doing at the club. The academy was not, a priority, and that's hard for the people that have worked so hard in there. But this club needs the first team. We need to get success for the fan base. That's what they're used to, and that's what they deserve. So we made that choice originally to focus on getting promotion to and then being competitive and trying to go again in League One, which I think we're doing. So now it's looking at some of the other things, the infrastructure, as you mentioned, the data and recruitment processes. We're really pleased with where they've got to, and then the performance departments at the club, making sure that they're as staffed and as skilled and as well directed as possible. So I suppose the change of title is something we made a decision. Didn't need an announcement, anything like that. It didn't really change what I was doing. Maybe formalised it a bit more internally, but other than that, it was evolving to work together and provide the best support for Ian. And give the best clarity for the staff inside and out, and obviously the perception outside of the business. So phase 3 probably for us will be once we achieve promotion. I think this is still quite haven't finished phase 2 yet. We have insert, and this is probably the challenge of the sporting director piece, because we'd probably say internally the academy's just started phase 2. If we decided to go for the B team model, the first team's approaching maybe the end of phase 2. The recruitment department, we probably feel we're now well into phase 3. So there's all across the areas of the club. There's all these different, different time frames going on, and it's trying to. I suppose that's obviously the job that I'm trying to do with Ian. Ian, how stressful being a football manager is, and having to win every week if you can. It's impossible for him to take on all the other long-term stuff as well. So as much as just simplifying the roles, I actually think it's so different at every club, and that's fine. And it's as long as there is clarity within each club as to what the sporting director, technical performance director, head of whatever those roles are, as long as there's clarity and everyone's pulling in the same direction. I'm not really too bothered about titles or the evolution of where the job's going. I think it's got to be bespoke to that club, and bespoke's a word that I like to use a lot. And I think that it applies to this role as well, even though it is such a high profile and senior leadership role, and it depends on ownership models, it depends on fan bases, it depends on a whole host of things. So that's probably where I sit on that one.
I would have to say it's well in alignment with my thoughts that researching for this podcast, Chris, is probably one of the most fun things I've had to do recently in terms of looking at the club. Bolton Wanderers, for me, there's no mind in my question, no question in my mind in terms of the game that they're optimizing for, which is very much a long-term game. And it seems fitting that your remit, the steps that you've taken since, have been so much sequential as they've been consequential. And dare I
Yeah,
say, I mean, I was in Miami a few weeks ago listening to a keynote speech from Brighton CEO Paul Barber, nonetheless, and he spoke
amazing.
about Brighton being Premiership ready 2-3 years in advance before being promoted. I mean, dare I say, Bolton are very much Championship ready at this stage.
Yeah, that's what we're building towards. And like I say, there are still areas that aren't, and there's still areas of the first team performance that aren't, and that comes from Ian's desire to get better and improve every day as well. We want to be, when we go up the Championship, we want to thrive and not survive. So we're trying to build and do things now. I think obviously the key one that most people look at is recruitment of players. But we feel, we've not got a huge turnover of players next season, only a couple of contracts expiring next summer and a couple of loans as it stands at the moment. So we feel we've got a good base of players, but that's an area that I'm really proud of that we've done with our recruitment team. There's a lot of hard work gone into it from a lot of people, and the way that we use data and how we create as much evidence as we can to help decision making in recruitment. I think we've been hugely successful, and that's something that hopefully will bode well into us making us successful and being championship ready. I think if any part of the club, obviously other than the first team playing squad, and is needs to be championship ready, I suppose it is that, to be able to recruit players, and I think we've done a really good job of that. Something I'm really proud of. We've got Tom Payne, who worked with me at the FA, one of the really bright young minds in the game. Sean Price, a guy who does a lot of our bespoke data analysis, who joined me, dropped me a bit like how we met, dropping a LinkedIn message, responding to me asking if anyone had any Tableau experience out there, and did the first few months voluntarily, and now he's coming on the journey with us. He's a vital part of the team. So yeah, it's about trying to build as much of the club as we can to be championship ready and continuously evolve even when we are there.
And I mean, speaking of recruitment, it's a funny enough segue because, of course, the Bolton Wanderers story, it's not only one that fans and pundits are buying into, it's also something that the bigger clubs are digging into, and it's piqued the interest of several few who have entrusted you with the development of their own young players. I'm
Yeah.
talking about the likes of Manchester City and James Trafford, Paris Magoma, Brentford, Connor Bradley
Mm-hmm.
in Liverpool, and Shola Shorts here, Manchester United, and the likes. I think that's been an important kernel or facet really of what you guys have achieved over the past 2 years, taking or being savvy really in a transfer market, the development of these players.
Yeah. And I think I've had this question a lot, obviously, from the success of our own players. But look, we also make no bones that if we could have someone who was as talented as those players and we could own them, we would do that every time. We play a game style and a game model that is similar to a lot of the top clubs, and I think that helps, particularly for forward players. Coming in and having you been used to having the ball under pressure to win, playing a possession based game, they're things that you don't always get even in the championship with the different game models. So that's something that I think we've managed and used really well. And for us, it's about how we evolve that and make sure this season, obviously, we've only got two loans at the moment in Paris and Zach. And I think it's something we've made, we've been cognizant of making sure that we do, build the squad in the right way. And the ones that I suppose, as well as those that always get the mention and the good work that we've done with those clubs to develop, internationally talented players, we're really pleased as a recruitment team and department. We're even more probably pleased with the Dion Charleses, the Owen Tolls, the Aaron Morleys, Dempsey's, and bringing players through our, George Thomason's, and how Rico Santos has developed, and being savvy in the transfer market like that has probably, we take just as much joy from that, even though they might not be the high profile ones at the moment. It's like it's got to be a joined up approach. I think going into the championship, we might have to reconsider that again, because we'll be able to jump into the next pool of loan talent, because we'll be a possession based team playing the championship in the Northwest with big crowds and expectancy. So we'll be able to jump into that next pool. So that might be for a period of years in the next cycle of our recruitment that we do end up with a couple more loans again. But every step is taken deliberately, like you said earlier, and I think that's something that is able. We talked about this the other day. We're able to be deliberate in those steps and not push things ahead of time because of that from the top. This is a long-term project. The ownership's committed to Ian. Ian's committed to it, and myself and Ian are able to know that we've got time to implement things. And you think how uncommon that is. We were at the game last night, and I think Ian's now the 10th longest serving manager in the country. Mousinho at Portsmouth, he's not even been there a calendar year yet. He's already 31st. Like, when you think about that, that probably tells you everything you need to know. So yeah, we're lucky to be in that environment, to be able to do that, and that we get trusted to do that.
not pushing ahead of time there being another key facet. You spoke earlier on about your ideal version of utopia being sustained success, and obviously the academy will be a huge part of that.
Mhm.
How projecting ahead, how many years do you think before you could see a considerable percentage of the Bolton Wanderers first team being academy homegrown prospects come through, Chris?
I think that's a really difficult question in any club, because you don't see that even the top academies now. It's not huge percentages of squads that are made up from it. Not as many times now where you see the United team, the Bayern Munich team, the Barca team that come through together. Obviously, where our academy's been and where it's going, it's got to keep up with the first team, which again won't be easy. But that's the gap we're trying to bridge. I don't really want to put a time frame on it, but I think with the addition of the B team, the constant evolution of the academy staff, I think gives us a chance, and we're already starting to see a couple of players who have come through the B team or brought in through that model having success. Hopefully, coming January, we'll see a few being loaned to the Football League to be able to go and show they can do that. Come back in pre-season and see where they're up to. And I think if we can, get a increase the reputation, we'll be able to attract more talent, and we'll be able to have a better chance of doing that. And look, to be able to bring to embed the playing culture that we want in the academy as well is it's a real task, and it's not something that happens overnight. So I don't want to put anyone at the academy under any pressure in terms of times and being specific. But yeah, it's something that, if we can continue to embed the playing culture in there, I think we'll start seeing more like it used to be.
And I mean, obviously, Chris, it's been quite the journey for yourself indeed. Obviously, it brings across its own few challenges. You spoke about an earlier lesson during your Huddersfield Town days being to be wallpaper, that you see a common mistake of people coming through. The ones who fail are the ones who don't listen. Whilst also at the same time, you're trying to encourage this risk averse approach, I would say, in your current position. How would you
Mm-hmm.
say, with all that being said, your leadership style has had to evolve from managing a top department, albeit just a department, to managing a whole
Yeah,
football world?
yeah, yeah. It's that. That's probably the big thing. That's the bit that I am still learning and still evolving in. And I think all good leaders do that. If I pretend that I've cracked it, or I don't think that's anything realistic for any leader, no matter how experienced they are. It's something you speak about again with Blackie a lot. But yeah, it is different. You just and you're managing as such a different array of people, and different types of personalities. Obviously with different expertise, and I think it's knowing. I'm still learning of knowing, what I am a real expert in, and empowering people to then be able to express themselves and give responsibility to those people without micromanaging. I think that can be something that when originally very it's even in the recruitment department, which I would say, the football side of this job is the bit that I'm good at and the bit that I like. And the man management side, I think even just being able to know when to delegate more, and that's been something that I've really learned over the past couple of years, and knowing that there's people who know, and being open about that. When I'm sat in the meetings with medical staff, sports science staff, I'm very, very quick to say I'm not an expert in this in terms of compared to their level of knowledge and expertise. But I have enough knowledge and understanding, and that comes through experience and having worked with good practitioners in those areas. And like I say, listening, being involved in MDT meetings at the FA and listening to different approaches and different practitioners and how things work. You can still pick up bits, but being open enough to admit that I don't know everything about this. But this is the overall strategy that I want us to strive for, that we need to give to Ian to make sure that we're best prepared to win on the pitch. So that's something, man management is the hardest part of it, and that's why Ian and managers have got that times a million with obviously the complexity of players and all that entails as well. So yeah, I think I'd describe my leadership style as evolving, but I don't think that's that might be taken. Some people might take that as a weakness and as a lack of experience, but I've been managing people now for including the department at Huddersfield for like 13, 14 years. And I'm only 37. And that's always been, like I say, in a competitive environment where there's pressure and where winning matters and where mistakes, you're accountable. So yeah, I've got a lot to learn with it still, but I feel I'm in a good place along that journey for the stage of the career that I'm at now.
Well, I would have to say, I mean, your leadership style is pretty much reminiscent of the role of sporting director, which as we spoke about earlier on, Chris, I mean, it's constantly
Yeah,
evolving and it's becoming even more important in the public sphere. So with that being
yeah,
said, I mean, where are you currently looking to, inside or outside of sport, to continue growing and testing yourself?
yeah. That's a really good point. It's something that there are ebbs and flows, obviously, in this job, and it's knowing sometimes I can get frustrated when you don't feel like you're spending as much time on yourself and on your self development. I think I've been lucky to be involved in with Dan Parnell and Mike Rigg and others in the ASD group, Association of Sporting Directors, being able to have that group. I've been lucky to be a part of a leadership course that the FA have put on with a lot of young, exciting people doing similar roles to me, learning about how to be a leader. And, those things I take a huge amount of satisfaction. I really enjoy them, and I make sure that I spend the time and effort to learn in those, probably because with having a busy job, a young family, it can slip through the cracks, and that's perfectly human as well. I think there's a lot of pressure at the minute. There's every amazing podcast about how we all get up at 5 a.m. and go for a run and then have your smoothie, and then like that's not real life for everybody. And you shouldn't feel bad about that. So there are times where I get frustrated that I don't spend as much time on developing myself as I should, but I know that at the moment, like I said, well, I'm still trying to learn in the job and making sure that the more formal things I can get involved with, where I can expand my network and learn off other people and have conversations with people who I respect and who I value. That's probably the most important thing for me. And I do think that can definitely come from outside of sport. Obviously, I think cross contamination between sports where there's a common thread can help, but obviously I used to speak to Blackie a lot around. Obviously, he was very big in the business world as well. There's a huge amount of crossover, even though it might not be obvious all the time, between that and trying to speak to people and get an understanding of what challenges people face from outside sport it is good to be able to learn for the specific problems that we face. But I also think it's amazing for providing context and like getting you a bit of perspective as well. So yeah, they're really vital and valuable pieces of or chunks of time to spend doing that to give a bit of context about where we're currently at as a club and reflecting on how we're doing, rather than just you can so easily get wrapped up in week to week to week and winning and losing, but what's the overall vision and how are we making people better, whether that be players, staff, and that's something that we should take pride in as well.
Fantastic, and may I add, be it 5 a.m. smoothies or Tuesday night chats, it's always a pleasure to talk with yourself, Chris. But
Thank you.
as this closing tradition on the show, I always ask the guest for what would, Chris, be your one bit of key advice for anyone listening that is that slightly bit inspired, who wishes to thread a similar path to yourself.
I think we've touched on it a little bit, but it really is a fine balance between um, listening but also having the confidence to articulate yourself. I think there's two parts, and it's working on each part of this equally. Your knowledge base is obviously really important, whether that be a medic, whether that be sports science, whether that be analysis, whether that be coaching. Your knowledge base and developing your knowledge on the area, your subject knowledge is important. But if you're not also developing on your communication and your social skills, you're missing a trick, because unless you can impart that knowledge in a way that's understood by players or staff or whoever the owners or board members or whoever it is, CEOs, whoever those people you're trying to impact are, if you can't get your message and explain your knowledge and subject knowledge across, then you're always going to be missing a trick. So I think people can often spend too much time. Right, I need to know the next thing. I need to be the like. How much time I would encourage people to spend as much time on developing their social skills and communication skills as they do about their craft knowledge. And we always get, I want to do the next course to learn how the next technology works, or I want to do the next course to hear the next keynote speaker. Like, how much time are you going out and thinking about how you impart your message, and as well as that, gain trust and the social skills Blackie always used to say. No one cares how much you know till they know how much you care, and I think that's something I've tried to take forward. I think is a good one for people wanting to get into this area, no matter what level it is, and what area it is, what subject area it is. I think that would be one of my big pieces of advice.
Absolutely fantastic. Chris, it was an absolute pleasure to host you today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Connor. Really enjoyed it.